Another Supreme Court justice is facing some ethics questions after ProPublica published another investigation. So now the report details a luxury fishing trip that Justice Samuel Alito took with a billionaire named Paul Singer back in 2008. So now Singer had flown Alito to the resort on his private jet, where another major Republican donor paid for the costs of the stay at this, again, luxury fishing resort. Now, the donor that owned the resort is Robin Arkley, who, again, had owned it at the time of this visit. Now, Alito did not include the fishing trip or the private jet trip in his financial disclosure statements, even though they technically are gifts and very high value gifts, by the way. And the report notes that Singer's hedge fund went on to have business before the Supreme Court at least 10 times in the following years. So, now, let me give you an example of that. This is a very interesting case that Singer's hedge fund had against the country of Argentina. In 2014, the court took a case between Singer's hedge fund and the nation of Argentina. Alito had not recused himself from the case and actually voted with a 7-1 majority in Singer's favor. That hedge fund ultimately received $2.4 billion from the Argentine government. And so that's on their investment. I will get into the details of that later because that case is pretty amazing. Now, that said, here we go again. Conservatives on the Supreme Court hobnobbing with wealthy billionaires, wealthy donors, and then, oh, golly gee, somehow they just end up voting in their favor. Weird. Now, look, even, and I can't prove that it's a result of the gifts, and nobody really can. But even if it's not a result of the gifts, that still looks really bad. I mean, is that not the appearance of corruption? Oh, you get a bunch of free trips and gifts and, luxury resorts and trips and all this wonderful stuff, and you didn't record it. And then you go on to vote in favor of the companies that these people happen to own or have a stake in. Yeah, I don't know. Seems a little bit, little corrupt. All right, so now obviously this appearance of corruption erodes the public trust. And look, let me give you some poll numbers. Last year, following the Dobbs decision, Gallup noted that confidence in the Supreme Court hit a low of just 25%. Another Marquette Law School poll, national survey from March, found that only 44% of adults approve of the job of the Supreme Court, while 56% disapprove. Those numbers actually got even worse in May, when it went down further to having only 41% job approval. Finally, according to a Change Research poll, a total of 82% of voters, this is all across the aisle, they support a proposal that would establish an ethics code to limit gifts that Supreme Court justices can receive. 70% of Republican voters agreed with this. And good, they should absolutely have an ethics code, but they do not. So now, one of the major ways, as I mentioned, again, with all these trips, is, again, you have billionaires like Harlan Crow, Paul Singer. They're getting access to these justices by paying for their travel and lodging. And, of course, these trips also get them in contact with other massively wealthy conservative donors, people who own think tanks. For example, you have Leonard Leo, who is the leader of the Federalist Society that's involved in this. Now, on his Alaska trip, Alito had stayed at a commercial fishing lodge owned by Mr. Arkley, who, again, major conservative donor. 3 years before that, same businessman had flown Justice Antonin Scalia, who had died in 2016, on a private jet to Alaska, and again, paid for his bill in order to stay there on that trip. Leonard Leo, the longtime leader of the Federalist Society, had attended and helped to organize this Alaska fishing vacation, the most recent one. Leo invited Singer to join, according to a person familiar with the trip, and asked Singer if he and Alito could fly on the Billionaire's jet. Leo had recently played an important role in the justice's confirmation to the court. Singer and the lodge owner both were major donors to Leo's political groups. So you can see there's this web of connections between these conservative billionaires, conservative groups, activism, in getting people confirmed to the Supreme Court. And again, we can just go back to the Federalist Society, again, making a list of justices and handing it to Trump and saying, nominate one of these people. And that's exactly what he did. Now, Leo did not respond to questions about his organizing the trip, but said in a statement that he would, quote unquote, and I love this, would never presume to tell Alito and Scalia what to do. Me? Using my massive fortune and my wonderful gifts that I shower upon my friends, I would never presume to try to influence them whatsoever. Bullshit. They think we're stupid or something. Now, Alito claims that I had no idea that this guy was gonna, have any cases brought before the Supreme Court. I mean, he just runs a gigantic hedge fund, that tends to make a lot of money in, disputes, in litigation, like he did with Argentina. Yeah. Oh, but, to be fair, Singer never, ever discussed his business interests. No. Yeah, I'm not sure I believe you. Bullshit. Now, he also said that if he hadn't been asked to go on that trip, then the seat would have just been vacant. It just would have been empty. And, that just means he didn't go out of his way to pay for it. Because it just would have been empty. I had to get on that plane. I just couldn't let that go to waste, Who would let that go to waste? Who would turn that down? You should. Because you're a Supreme Court justice. He also wrote that prior to the report, again, this was a Wall Street Journal op-ed that came out hours prior to ProPublica releasing this report to go out and get ahead of it and to try to defend himself. He said that justices commonly interpreted the disclosure requirements to not include, quote unquote, accommodations and transportation for social events. So he knew this was coming. He knew this report was going to look pretty bad, pretty damning. And so he, again, tried to get ahead of it and say, no, that doesn't count. That doesn't apply. These trips that can cost upwards of $100,000. I mean, those don't count. Those don't count as gifts. I mean, that I should record anyway. I mean, what? Get off my back. Just get off my back. How dare you try to hold me accountable? I'm untouchable. I'm a member of the Supreme Court. Now, I mean, it really is amazing that they're treating this as like getting somebody a card or a keychain, No, these are massively expensive trips on private jets with, again, huge Republican donors that represent business interests. They should absolutely be reporting on it at the very least. Of course, I don't think that you should be allowed to take these gifts at all. Oh, well, that's not fair. That's not fair. Why are they not allowed to take trips with their friends that are paid for by their friends? That happen to be, again, gigantic Republican donors, business, people who own businesses like hedge funds. Because you decided to take a seat on the highest court in the land. You did that. You did. Yeah, nobody forced you to take that seat. Nobody did. No one forced Alito. So you should be, at the very least, working in the best interests of the country and to do your job. Okay? Not to serve your billionaire friends by ruling pretty much in favor of them almost every single time. And again, in a lot of these cases, they choose billionaire buddies. So now let's get to the Argentina situation, because Singer's hedge fund went after the country of Argentina. Back in 2001, Argentina went into default, and so Singer's fund came in and they bought government debt at a very, very steep discount. Okay? So eventually, Argentina, their economy recovers, and Singer's firm says, okay, we want all of our investment back plus interest. Now, normally creditors who do this will settle for less, but Singer's firm, he got rich by doing this exact thing. Now he decided to do it to a sovereign nation. And so he took the case to the U.S. courts 8 times over a 7-year period. First in 2007, that was a year before the trip. Now, a lower court had actually stopped Singer and another fund from seizing Argentine central bank funds held in the United States at the time. In 2010, after the trip, the fund had asked the court to once again take up aspects of the dispute. So now, here's the thing. It wasn't the fund just going in and asking every single time. No, you also had adversaries of Singer's firm filing appeals. So now, in those cases, Singer's fund successfully argued for the justices to not take up the case and to let a lower, more favorable court ruling stand. Oh, that's interesting. Now, finally, after 2 years after Singer's fund launched a lobbying blitz in 2012, and after they attempted to illegally seize an Argentine Navy vessel parked in Ghana, the case finally was heard in court. So now this was in 2014. At the time, you had the U.S. government, under the Obama administration, filing a brief on Argentina's side, citing, of course, that, hey, look, we got to work out, we got to look out for, like, diplomatic relations here. This seems rather weird, having this sovereign nation basically get, litigated against by a U.S.-based hedge fund. Now, on the other side, a conservative group called the Judicial Crisis Network that happened to be affiliated with Leonard Leo and known for spending millions of dollars on judicial confirmation fights. Well, they filed a brief that supported Mr. Singer and his hedge fund. Now, by the way, that is the only time this has ever happened with that group, okay? The only time Leonard Leo's Judicial Crisis Network ever actually filed a brief in a case at the Supreme Court on the side of, again, this group, okay? Or this hedge fund. So now, obviously, you can look at that and see a conflict of interest here, okay? Again, this was after the trip. This was after all these people were very buddy-buddy with each other, got to know each other, obviously helping fund their, the ascension to the Supreme Court, the court seat, all that stuff. So now experts argued that knowing what we know, Alito should have 100% recused himself from this particular case because this is a conflict of interest. Abby Smith, for example, a law professor at Georgetown, said, if I found out after the fact that I'd be outraged on behalf of my client. And frankly, I'd be outraged on behalf of the legal system. Well, yeah, we should all be. Charles Gay, Indiana University law professor and leading expert on court recusals, had a different take. Well, similar take, I should say. Quote, if you were good friends, what were you doing ruling on this case? Now, again, that's the defense, not only Thomas and Harlan Crow, but now Singer and Alito. We were just friends, guys. We were just friends. As a Supreme Court justice, why am I not allowed to have extremely rich billionaire friends that will pour money on me and take me out to these fancy trips and dinners and resorts and vacations? Why can't I have that? Why are you being so unfair? Babies. That's what they are. Now, Charles also said this, quote, "And if you weren't good friends," again, another claim, right? "What were you doing accepting this?" Referring to the flight on the private jet. Now, in his Wall Street Journal op-ed, Alito defended himself by saying this: "It was, and is my judgment, that these facts would not cause a reasonable and unbiased person to doubt my ability to decide the matters in question impartially." Well, now, so everybody who's against this apparently is a unreasonable and biased person for thinking that, hey, that looks like corruption. And that would probably be a lot of people. I would say the majority of the country saying, hey, wait a minute, this looks super corrupt. Especially since I read you the poll where you had over 80% of the country saying, hey, we should have limits on these gifts, you know, that are given from billionaires to members of the Supreme Court. So, I mean, you want to go and you want to call the vast majority of Americans who are against this kind of thing unreasonable and biased for doubting your ability to be impartial when you've been getting lots and lots of, you know, again, trips worth hundreds of thousands of dollars from these billionaires. Go ahead, see how that works out for you. At least when it comes to the public trust, of which there is none in the court anymore as a result. I think you're all corrupt. I think that nobody trusts you in the court. And I think there needs to be massive reform. I think there needs to be term limits. I think there needs to be, again, major ethics reforms in the fact that I don't want any billionaires or anyone giving these gifts to justices at all. Again, you're supposed to be on the court. You're supposed to be subject to a higher standards. So than the average person, which, by the way, the average person in Congress, they can't get away with this. No, they're not able to get this, but somehow the Supreme Court is. No, it's bullshit. That's what it is. The sad thing, though, is, unfortunately, I don't see anything that's going to hold any of these people accountable. We know of their corruption. It is very, very, very obvious. But nothing will happen to them because they're not held to any sort of standard.